In a landscape fraught with uncertainty and shifting allegiances, the recent developments surrounding China's economic strategies and international relations have captured global attention. As President Xi Jinping seeks to bolster confidence among domestic businesses amidst rising tensions with the United States, tech giants like Alibaba are responding with ambitious investment plans aimed at artificial intelligence, AI, and cloud computing. This confluence of political and economic forces illustrates a pivotal moment in China's trajectory as it navigates both internal challenges and external pressures. During a high-profile meeting in February, Xi engaged with prominent Chinese business leaders, including Alibaba founder Jack Ma, in a significant show of support for the private sector. This gathering has been deemed crucial by industry experts, with Alibaba chairman Zhou Cai emphasizing its impact on business confidence. People underestimate the importance of that meeting, Cai remarked at a recent conference in Singapore. What that meeting did to the entire entrepreneur sector is it gave private business people confidence to make investments in their business. This renewed governmental backing comes at a time when China's economy is grappling with sluggish domestic demand and rising youth unemployment. Cai noted that consumers are standing on the sidelines waiting to spend and urged that confidence and sentiment are vital to stimulate spending. The optimism stemming from Xi's meeting has propelled Alibaba to commit to an unprecedented investment of 380 billion yuan, approximately $52 billion, in AI and cloud infrastructure over the next 3 years. This move not only underscores Alibaba's ambition but also marks the largest computing project funded by a single private business in China. However, the backdrop to these developments is marked by an increasingly complex relationship with the United States, where trade tensions continue to loom large. As the Biden administration grapples with its own policy toward China, the potential for a trade war remains a pressing concern. Experts warn that a breakdown in negotiations could have far-reaching consequences not just for the two countries but for global markets reliant on their economic stability. The interconnected nature of modern economies means that a protracted conflict could disrupt supply chains and impact businesses worldwide. Amid these challenges, both Xi and U.S. President Donald Trump are under pressure to demonstrate leadership that prioritizes pragmatism over confrontation. As negotiations between the two nations resume, trade barriers, technology controls, and commitments to tackle issues such as fentanyl trafficking will be at the forefront. The stakes are high for both sides, as failing to reach an amicable resolution could exacerbate economic woes and further strain diplomatic relations. The timing of Xi's engagement with business leaders may signal a strategic pivot toward fostering a more cooperative atmosphere with the private sector, which has faced mounting scrutiny and regulation in recent years. By encouraging innovation and investment, the Chinese government appears to be taking steps to rejuvenate its economy, leaning on the very entrepreneurs it once sought to rein in. Looking ahead, the outcomes of these developments will hinge on the ability of both China and the United States to navigate their complex relationship with foresight and mutual respect. The global economy stands at a crossroads, and the choices made in the coming months will not only define the future of U.S. China relations but also the broader landscape of international trade and investment. As businesses like Alibaba forge ahead with ambitious plans, the question remains whether this will translate into a sustainable recovery for the Chinese economy and a stable path forward in its dealings with the West. As the world watches anxiously, the potential for a renewed trade war between the United States and China looms large, with both nations grappling with their own economic pressures. Recent discussions among Chinese leaders in Beijing reflect a deep concern over rising tensions with the U.S. while maintaining a cautious optimism that a resolution may still be possible. The urgency of the situation is palpable, as a failure to reach an agreement could plunge both economies into a conflict that historically yields no winners. After decades of engagement with Chinese leaders, one cannot help but notice the unique challenges facing China today. The country's economy is experiencing its most significant strain in 2 decades, marked by high youth unemployment, a faltering property market, and growing discontent among the middle class.
Although Xi Jinping's leadership appears unshakable, the pressures on his administration are mounting, prompting a strategic pivot towards strengthening trade relationships with Russia and nations in the global south.
While diversifying trade could offer long-term advantages, the immediate reality is clear: there is no viable substitute for American markets.
On the other side of the Pacific, President Donald Trump finds himself in a position where a breakdown in relations with China could undermine his economic agenda. The recent hike in tariffs on Chinese goods has already sparked retaliation from Beijing, further complicating trade dynamics amid ongoing disputes with Canada and Mexico. The potential consequences of an extended trade battle could ripple through global supply chains, with markets in Europe and Asia also feeling the strain. Both countries, as the world's largest economies, must recognize the risks of an uncontrolled escalation. Despite the ongoing trade volleys, there remains a glimmer of hope as both leaders keep diplomatic channels open. Recent meetings of China's National People's Congress have seen the approval of measures aimed at revitalizing the sluggish economy by fostering consumer spending and bolstering private sector confidence. A stable relationship with the U.S. could facilitate much-needed domestic reforms for China, making it imperative for Xi to show genuine willingness to negotiate. To forge a path forward, pragmatic dialogue is essential. Key issues such as trade barriers and technology restrictions dominate the agendas of both nations. Setting a definitive timeline for negotiations, no longer than 6 months, could prevent discussions from becoming mired in delays, a tactic historically employed by Beijing. Maintaining momentum is crucial, and should talks falter, the reimposition of tariffs should remain on the table as leverage. A critical topic that must be addressed is the trafficking of fentanyl, a significant concern in Washington. The U.S. Justice Department has implicated Chinese firms in supplying chemicals used by Mexican cartels to produce this deadly opioid. Trump has made it clear that any meaningful engagement with China hinges on addressing this issue, hoping that his rapport with Xi can yield cooperation. A trade war is not a solution; instead, a results-driven agreement could emerge if both parties commit to tackling this pressing problem. Moreover, trade commitments made during Trump's first term have not been fully honored by China, complicating the trust necessary for any new agreements. If Beijing wishes to see a reduction in tariffs, it must demonstrate its commitment to fulfilling previous pledges. An enforceable trade deal is paramount for both sides. Suspending further tariff escalations during negotiations would create a conducive environment for dialogue. Instability caused by fluctuating duties only breeds uncertainty, forcing companies on both sides to re-evaluate their supply chains. However, this suspension must come with conditions. Any signs of undermining negotiations or unfair retaliation from China would justify the U.S. reimposing tariffs. Technology restrictions, a focal point of conflict, must also be part of the negotiation discussions. The U.S. has legitimate concerns regarding the transfer of advanced technologies that could bolster China's military capabilities. Striking a balance between protecting national security and encouraging innovation and investment is essential for both nations. Additionally, China's practices surrounding the overproduction of goods and electric vehicle exports have raised alarms in the European Union and other trading partners, prompting potential trade barriers against China. A U.S. China agreement that alleviates trade tensions could yield beneficial effects for the global economy, preventing a further fragmentation of international trade. As the geopolitical landscape continues to evolve, the entrenched hawkish stance on China within U.S. policy circles complicates the path to improved relations. The risk of slipping into a Cold War-style divide persists, with both nations viewing one another as existential threats. Strong political leadership from both sides will be necessary to avoid this trajectory. Throughout my years of observing U.S.-China relations, one truth remains: pragmatic approaches yield positive outcomes when both sides choose cooperation over confrontation.
President Trump now has a pivotal opportunity to pursue a meaningful agreement with Xi Jinping, and seizing that moment could pave the way for a more stable economic future for both nations and the world at large. In a bold declaration last week at the National People's Congress, NPC Chinese Premier Li Qiang emphasized that boosting consumption would be the government's top economic priority for the coming year. This announcement came amidst ongoing economic challenges as China grapples with sluggish growth, a real estate crisis, and rising unemployment, particularly among college graduates. As expectations for a fiscal stimulus designed to reignite consumer confidence continue to be met with disappointment, many observers are questioning the effectiveness of the government's plans. Consumption is at the heart of our economic strategy, Premier Li stated, advocating for a people-centered approach aimed at improving living standards. However, a closer examination of the spending plans reveals a far less robust commitment to consumer support than the rhetoric suggests. The proposed initiatives include a mere $41 billion for an expanded trade-in program aimed at encouraging sales of cars and household appliances. Moreover, the increase in old age benefits for seniors, just $2.76, does little to alleviate the financial strain of high healthcare costs in a country where medical bills can be crippling. While the overall budget is expansionary with significant infrastructure investments, the actual measures to stimulate consumer spending remain tepid. The budget deficit has been raised to 4% of GDP, a move Beijing hopes will sustain economic growth at around 5%. Yet many economists express skepticism, with estimates suggesting that growth last year may have been closer to 2.4% or 2.8%. The government has also earmarked approximately 11.9 trillion renminbi for high-tech industries, a clear indication of President Xi Jinping's continued commitment to transforming China into a global technology powerhouse. This focus on technological development is underscored by the ongoing tensions with the United States, where tariffs and restrictions on technology exports are increasing pressure on Chinese markets. As Xi himself acknowledged, the highest priority remains the creation of world-class enterprises. Even as the government recognizes the need for more consumer-driven economic policies, the challenges facing Chinese consumers are becoming increasingly dire. Recent polls indicate that one-third of white-collar workers experienced wage decreases last year, highlighting the growing economic anxiety among the populace. The government's admission of weak public expectations during the NPC meetings marks a significant shift in tone, as the Communist Party typically projects an image of unwavering strength. This acknowledgement suggests that the leadership is aware of the discontent brewing among citizens who have few avenues for public expression. In the context of U.S. China relations, the economic landscape is further complicated, with President Donald Trump's administration imposing tariffs and restrictions. There is a pressing need for both nations to seek pragmatic solutions to avoid a full-blown trade war. Analysts suggest that a potential trade agreement could alleviate inflationary pressures in the U.S. while providing a boost to Chinese imports of American goods. Such a deal might also serve to stabilize both economies in the face of mounting pressures. Economists warn, however, that while a trade pact could provide short-term relief, it is not a panacea for China's underlying economic issues. The focus on high-tech industries, while crucial for long-term growth, may overshadow the immediate needs of the population struggling with job insecurity and stagnant wages. As Xi navigates these economic uncertainties, he remains committed to his vision of a self-sufficient technological future. Even as the government's social safety nets seem increasingly underfunded, the optimism expressed by Premier Li regarding the resilience of China's economy, likened to a giant ship cleaving the waves, stands in stark contrast to the reality faced by many citizens. With rising youth unemployment and a faltering property market, the path ahead remains fraught with challenges. As the global economy continues to shift, the ability of China to balance its ambitions for technological advancement with the pressing needs of its populace will be critical. Looking forward, the interplay between domestic consumption, technological investments, and international trade relations will likely dictate the trajectory of China's economic recovery. The government may need to recalibrate its approach to ensure that its grand visions do not come at the expense of the everyday realities faced by its citizens. How effectively it can navigate these challenges will determine not only the future of the Chinese economy but also its standing in an increasingly complex global landscape. In recent months, a confluence of developments has underscored China's evolving military ambitions and its socio-economic landscape. As the nation navigates complex geopolitical waters, reports indicate that China's naval modernization efforts may receive significant boosts from foreign firms, a situation that could reshape regional security dynamics.
In tandem,
a comprehensive report delivered by Premier Li Qiang at the National People's Congress outlines ambitious economic goals and governmental reforms aimed at addressing both domestic and international challenges. According to a recent article in the Washington Post, Chinese naval modernization is increasingly being supported by foreign companies, which could enhance the capabilities of the People's Liberation Army Navy plan. This partnership approach reflects China's broader strategy to integrate advanced technologies and skills from international players, a move that could expedite the development of sophisticated naval assets. As tensions in the Asia-Pacific region continue to escalate, this initiative not only signals China's commitment to strengthening its maritime presence but also raises concerns among neighboring countries about the implications for regional stability. In related news, the Foreign Policy Research Institute has highlighted China's intensified focus on Taiwan, emphasizing a mix of military and civilian measures aimed at achieving reunification.
The report suggests that Beijing is adopting a dual strategy that combines military readiness with socio-economic incentives for Taiwanese citizens.
This approach aims to sway public opinion in favor of reunification while simultaneously preparing for potential military contingencies. Analysts note that as China increases its military posturing, the potential for miscalculation or conflict in the Taiwan Strait grows, raising the stakes for all parties involved. Against this backdrop of military development and regional tension, Premier Li Qiang's government report at the National People's Congress outlines China's economic trajectory for 2025. The report showcases significant achievements in 2024, including a 5% increase in GDP, the creation of over 12 million urban jobs, and improved living standards for citizens. Premier Li emphasized the need for continued reform and opening up, calling for aggressive measures to stimulate domestic demand, innovate in technology, and enhance the overall quality of life for the Chinese populace. However, the premier also acknowledged the challenges posed by a complex international environment characterized by trade tensions and geopolitical uncertainties. He pointed out that while China's economic growth remains robust, effective demand is still weak and public expectations are low. Addressing these issues will require a delicate balance of policy measures, including targeted fiscal and monetary policies to stimulate consumption and investment. The report outlines several key initiatives for the coming year, including an ambitious agenda to bolster innovation, enhance the quality of education, and promote sustainable development. Premier Li's government intends to tackle environmental concerns, aiming for a substantial reduction in pollution while advancing green technologies. These goals reflect a growing recognition of the need for sustainable growth amid increasing public demand for environmental accountability. As China positions itself on the global stage, the intersection of military modernization and economic growth will be crucial. The foreign partnerships in naval development could potentially redefine military capabilities, while robust domestic policies may bolster economic resilience. However, the path forward is fraught with challenges, including addressing the needs of an evolving workforce and managing international relations, particularly concerning Taiwan. In conclusion, as China embarks on this multifaceted journey of modernization and reform, the coming years will reveal how effectively it can leverage foreign partnerships, navigate geopolitical tensions, and sustain economic growth. The world will be watching closely, as the outcomes of these strategies could have far-reaching implications not only for China but for the broader international community as well. In a political landscape increasingly defined by shifting alliances and strategic maneuvering, former Trump advisor Steve Bannon has sparked a fresh wave of speculation regarding Donald Trump's foreign policy stance towards Russia and Ukraine. His recent comments suggest that Trump's apparent favoritism toward Russia might not merely be an impulsive decision but rather part of a calculated strategy to realign U.S. diplomacy, particularly in opposition to China. This assertion raises eyebrows and prompts deeper examination of the intricacies of international relations amid escalating geopolitical tensions. Bannon, who served as Trump's chief strategist, has been vocal about his belief that the United States should pivot away from Ukraine and forge a new relationship with Russia. In a recent appearance on Tim Dillon's podcast, he laid out a provocative narrative. The Chinese Communist Party (CCP) is perceived as America's principal adversary,
and the U.S. must consider Russia as a potential ally in that fight. The elites in Silicon Valley and Wall Street sold out the working class and handed the Chinese the keys to wealth, Bannon asserted, arguing that the only way to counter China's rising influence is through a process he terms decoupling, which involves cutting off China from critical capital and technology. Bannon's rhetoric underscores a long-standing belief that the CCP represents an existential threat to Western civilization. He has previously suggested that Russia shares common ground with Western values, which he believes could facilitate a grand bargain between Washington and Moscow. However, critics of this approach point out the inherent contradictions and risks involved in attempting to manipulate both Russia and China simultaneously, particularly given the historical context of Sino-Russian relations. As Bannon articulates this vision, Trump's recent statements about Ukraine's precarious situation have added fuel to the fire. Trump remarked that Ukraine may not survive the ongoing conflict with Russia, which some interpret as a tacit endorsement of Russian aggression. This perspective has prompted a mixed response from foreign policy analysts, many of whom are struggling to discern the rationale behind what they perceive as erratic and chaotic diplomatic moves by the current administration. The concept of a reverse Kissinger, which advocates for splitting Russia from China in order to confront Xi Jinping's ambitions, is gaining traction among some optimists. They argue that a successful diplomatic strategy could echo the historical rapprochement between the U.S. and China that Henry Kissinger orchestrated in the 1970s. However, the challenges of this approach are manifold. Unlike in the 1970s, when China was relatively isolated and impoverished, the current geopolitical landscape features a China that is economically robust and strategically aligned with Russia, complicating any attempts to drive a wedge between them. Recent statements from Wang Yi, China's foreign minister, underscore this point. He reiterated the steadfastness of the China-Russia alliance, asserting that no external pressures would sway their partnership. This commitment is underscored by deepening military and economic ties, which have grown more pronounced in response to Western sanctions against Russia and tariffs imposed by the U.S. on Chinese goods. The suggestion that the U.S. could replicate past diplomatic successes by courting Russia while alienating China seems increasingly tenuous as Beijing solidifies its position as a global power. The implications of this strategic realignment extend beyond the immediate sphere of U.S. Russia-China relations, with Trump's administration potentially veering towards a more isolationist stance. European leaders are feeling the pressure to reconsider their alliances. In this context, Chinese officials have initiated a charm offensive aimed at EU leaders, criticizing Trump's approach as brutal and domineering while promoting China as a partner focused on peace and cooperation. This shift could lead to a recalibration of Europe's foreign policy, potentially positioning the continent as a neutral player in the U.S. China rivalry. As the geopolitical chess game unfolds, the stakes are high. The dynamics of U.S. relations with both Russia and China are fraught with complexity and unpredictability, and the potential for miscalculation looms large. Observers will be closely watching how the Trump administration navigates these turbulent waters, as the implications of its foreign policy decisions could reverberate across the globe for years to come. The unfolding narrative suggests that while Bannon and Trump might envision a grand strategy, the practicalities of global diplomacy often defy simplistic calculations.